Good morning, afternoon. It's not quite noon yet. Good, not quite noon. It's about to be noon. No, it's not quite 1. So good afternoon. It is about to be 1. Good afternoon. Let me make sure that that's all working on there. Yeah, well, if you saw my setup, it's so super not profesh. If you saw this setup, wow. It's fine, it's fine. Just got things like balanced in places. Delish. Hey, all right, it's 1 o'clock. Oh yes, and yes, good noon to you from Texas. Love it, love it, love it. It's 1 o'clock here in my time zone. So, good 1 o'clock. Good afternoon. Hey, my name is Dr. Shannon Coates, and I am coming to you live from north of Toronto. These are the lands. Let me just get that up so I can just read that. So these are the lands, the traditional lands of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, the Mississauga, and the Wendake Neo-Wencio peoples. Hello, Lizarino herds. Mwah. Dear friend of mine, and my pronouns are she, her, or they, them. Feel free to use whichever ones help you to, look, I present pretty femme, right? So I also happen to think that the binary is a construction, societal construction, and I kind of hate a lot of it. So if you would like to practice using they, them pronouns with someone who presents real femme, so your brain can do a little bit of work, feel free. Feel free to do that with me. Okay, right, so here we are. What do? I am a person who provides resources, classes, courses for independent voice teachers, for the generalists, for the voice teachers out there who are doing the work that requires this incredibly broad range of understanding of how to teach, and also who to work with, how we work with different kinds of people at various levels of their trajectory and learning trajectory and various levels of coordination, etc. So that's what I do. The next thing that is coming up is the very popular class. So something interesting that someone said to me recently, someone emailed me recently, they had done a lot of professional development over the summer and through just in the last couple of months, a lot of professional development with some wonderful educators. And one of the things they said, that one of the things that is very perceptively missing in that professional development is the information about how to work with, one moment while I close the door, I'm back, is the information about how to work with changing voices, so adolescent expanding voice, and the information about how to work with child voice. So that information is kind of conspicuous in its absence from the larger, sort of well-known training centers, right? So very often the information that you're getting in these larger training centers and in these larger courses, in these voice pedagogy institutes, etc., is information that is relevant to the matured voice. So, and by matured, I don't necessarily mean like old, I just mean that an adult voice, so a voice that is settled, if you will. So very often the information, while we're definitely getting more about, in many of these cases, about contemporary sounds, we're not quite as Western classically focused as we have been. Especially if you go to something like, the Shenandoah Institute, right? Like that's all CCM. So, we're definitely not quite as Western classically focused. However, conspicuous in its absence is the information about working with child voice and working with adolescent voice and changing voice. So this is one of the reasons, and I'll say too, this is one of the things that I go into classroom voice ped classes, etc., to talk to people about. These child voice and adolescent voice. These are the subjects that I go into voice pedagogy classes in academic settings, etc., to talk to people about, and multi-teacher studios. I do trainings with multi-teacher studios. Why? Because this is the information that very often is missing from these larger pedagogical institutions and trainings. And also, this is often the primary client for folks who are working in an independent voice studio, right? So often the primary client is that teenage voice, changing voice, often child voice. And I think there are lots of wonderful resources for child voice. Primary among them, my favorite one is, of course, the full voice music. Of course, shout out to Nikki Loney. But having said all of that, that is why I am offering these courses, and also that's part of the reason that they are quite popular, right? People ask for them quite a lot, just because I've got all this great information from my other training, but I don't have, they missed a whole section on how to work with like changing voice or child voice. So some of the questions that folks are asking and some of the information that folks are hoping to get out of these courses has been coming in, because we've been doing a pre-class survey, like what do you want to get, what are you hoping you're going to learn, and so I'm going to post that a little later today as well. So if any of those questions look familiar to you, you might want to consider doing this class. Obviously, if you can't, maybe not obviously, let me say, if you cannot attend live, no worries, because the recordings, access to the recordings is included in registration. Okay, blah. What we're here to talk about today, though, is something that we're not going to address explicitly in the child voice and adolescent voice classes, the things we're going to talk about today. The things we're going to talk about today are explicitly about the things we often get wrong. 3 things, because, everybody loves some pithy numbers. Looks good in the algorithm. Makes a good post. 3 things you're gonna blah, blah, blah. It's so catchy. 3 things that we often get wrong when we're working with young singers. And part of the reason these things are coming up, and part of the reason that I'm talking about these 3 things, is because as I prepare the classes, or as I do some revamping from lots of different resources and lots of different areas, and these 3 things tend to be assumptions in the information that I'm looking at. So these 3 things are kind of underneath the articles, the books, not all of them, but the books, some of the resources in that way. These kind of assumptions are kind of infiltrated with the information. So they come through. And so when I'm doing the classes, while I'm not going to address those assumptions directly in the classes, I'm going to talk about them right now, but the way that I present the information in the classes has a different set of assumptions. So that just means, so we're going to deconstruct some assumptions or some things we often get wrong about working with young singers, children and adolescents. So the first thing that we often get wrong when we're working with, 3 things, yes. The first thing that we often get wrong when we're working with children and adolescents, and this is something that I have talked about before in other live office hours, etc., is this idea that it is possible to get meaningful consent in the voice studio from children and adolescents. I would say that it's not even possible necessarily to get meaningful consent from adults. So that's a topic maybe for a whole other thing. And perhaps it's just more possible. But we have this assumption in the voice studio often where we think, well, if I ask the mom, if I ask the dad, thank you, say it louder, right? If I ask the dad, if I ask the parent, if I ask the person, the adult who's here with them, if I can touch to show breathing, or if I can touch to release the shoulders, or if I can, those aren't your shoulders, if I can touch to, like if I do a little massage to release the shoulders, or if I can have them put their hand on my stomach in order to like feel the inhalation exhalation process, if I can do X, Y, Z, if I ask them, and in the case of maybe a teenager, If I ask them and I say, hey, is it okay if we talk about X, Y, Z? Mm-hmm. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Is it okay if I talk about X, Y, Z? Maybe I'm in front of a master class, maybe I'm in front of a whole bunch of people and I'm working with an adolescent and I say, you don't mind if I talk about blah, blah, blah in front of these people, right? Or if I point out this thing by like, you know, touching them. Or if I say to the crowd, this is something I heard recently. If I say to the crowd and I'm in a master class and I say to the whole crowd of people who are watching and I say, I'm going to get consent, right? And then I touch them, or I say, of course they're going to give me consent. Ha ha ha, we all saw that I have consent. And then I touch them. That is not meaningful consent. That's not consent. In the case of the child cannot consent because they are a child, and the adult cannot consent on their behalf. The adult cannot say, yeah, it's fine to touch my kid on their behalf. That's not consent. Or at least that's not meaningful consent, which I hope that you are saying, I know, I'm going to talk about that in a minute, which I would hope that you are saying, you know, it's creepy. I know, it's creepy. Yes. So let me say something about that as well. That's a really good point. We often do that as well, where they put their hand on, you say like, put your hand on top of mine, right? Like, you know, I'm going to put my hand here and then you put your hand on top of mine and then you can still feel it. Let me talk about that in a minute. So in the case of child, there is no consent, okay? So just stop it. Just stop it and have no underlying assumption about the fact that you can get. And you ask them if it's okay. Yeah, let me talk about that in a minute, right? There's this underlying assumption that we can get consent and we can get meaningful consent. We cannot. It is not possible with children. Even if their parent says something like, yeah, it's fine, they love hugs. Maybe they love hugs. This is different from hugs, okay? I'm not talking about whether or not you can hug like 7-year-olds when they want to hug you. That's a whole other thing. I'm talking about voice lessons where I'm putting my hand on someone's body to manipulate or change their body or to show a different kind of coordination by changing something that's happening in their body, right? Okay, that's the first thing with child. With adolescent, teenagers, we also cannot get meaningful consent. Why? I mean, they're still minors, so there's that. There's also that. But even if they say, yeah, I'm fine with that, and even if maybe they are, it's not meaningful consent. Why? Because you are in a power dynamic situation. This is a power dynamic. I am the voice teacher, you are the student. I am the voice teacher, you're the student. That is a power dynamic. It is only the most possessed of people, young people, who will have the courage, the strength, the internal integrity, the training to be able to say to someone who is a teacher in that situation, to be able to say, no, I don't want to be touched, even if you think that it's going to be really good for me. I believe you that you think this is going to be good for me, and I don't want you to touch me. Who has the presence of mind to do that? And the reason that that is still not meaningful consent when they say, oh yeah, it's fine, no problem at all, I don't feel it, is because these are young people who do not yet understand what it means to be touched. They do not necessarily, right, understand that. Also, we are talking about people, children, adolescents who have been in our Western educational system that says that anybody has especially if someone who is presenting, someone who we perceive as female, right? So especially someone who is being raised female or presented as female, who we perceive to be female. That person has been told that my body, I don't get to say the things that I need to say or want to say about my body, and my body is not necessarily my own to do with what I want. Yeah? So, in a voice studio situation, meaningful consent with adults or with adolescents and children, not a thing. And folks, if you are doing a master class, if you are teaching in front of a lot of people, if you are the master class technician, if you are the teacher in front of a lot of people, you saying to the crowd, oh, it's fine, right? Is not, I'm not going to swear, it's not consent. and it's not fine. It's not fine. You just decided for that person, you absolutely took away their agency. You decided for that person whether or not it was fine, because who in their right mind, except for, again, a very well self-possessed, trained, etc. person, young person, is going to say to you, the masterclass teacher, in front of an entire crowd of people, no, it's not fine, don't touch me. Who's going to say that? Who? I ask you. They do not have agency to say it in that moment, right? So that is not consent. As to what we were talking about earlier, like placing one hand, so touch my hand and put my hand on here. As well as when we're working with adults in the studio who say, who are giving consent. And again, please understand that I'm talking about a generalized, I'm talking about a typical generalist independent voice studio here, right? I'm not talking about, yes, asking kids to touch you, also not okay, and I'm gonna get there too, eh? So just be clear that, just to be clear, I'm talking about a generalist, typical independent voice studio situation. I am not talking about studios that are specializing in movement modalities, who specialize in body modalities, right? So folks who specialize in Alexander techniques, folks who specialize in somatic experiencing, folks who specialize, so folks who do, yoga along with, like, all of these movement and body modalities that we often see come together with voice teaching. That is a different thing. First of all, the singer who is working with you knows when they go in that that is what they are signing up for. Secondly, if you're being trained, if you have Alexander training, if you have somatic experiencing training, if you have any of those modalities, you are trained in how to work with people in order to mitigate the damage that can come from hands-on, right? So you are trained in those modalities in terms of how do we work with real people and still support their agency while getting this work done. So there's training that comes with that, right? So us in the voice studio, if we have not had that training and if we are not working with those modalities, we do not have that training. So don't do it. Okay, so here's the thing about, yes, explicit specialization that's communicated prior to the moment. Exactly. That's the whole key, right? So this is what's going to happen, and here's what's going to happen. And also, tell me in advance what you don't want to happen. You're allowed to do that. Like, there's lots of, right? And we're not working this way with, like, young singers, right? We're not, it's unlikely that we're doing full-on Alexander training with, 8-year-olds. Like, it's unlikely. Like, we may be implementing it, but like an actual, anyway. Here's the thing about my hand on, your hand on my hand. This is a challenging one for children. Let me tell you why it's not my favorite. It's not my favorite simply because it goes along with the same idea of the child does not know that this isn't necessarily okay, right? And the child is not necessarily, I know your intentions are good, but the child is not being given a meaningful choice to say no, or that it feels uncomfortable. Again, it's not a meaningful choice. And here's the thing about, we had an article come out recently, maybe 3 or 4 issues ago in the Journal of Singing about really a thorough examination of the issue of touching in the voice studio. It was quite a balanced and thorough examination of, like, the pros and cons of touching in the voice studio. And one of their conclusions was that touch and manipulation can be with appropriate consent, with adults, relationships established in advance, etc., or parameters established in advance, etc., can be an appropriate and effective way to change something quickly and to show something quickly. I would like to say that the piece that is missing with that quick learning is that it's not actually the most effective learning. So the most effective learning is when we come to it ourselves. That's when we own it. That's when it is ours. That's when it's understood within our own body. That's how we can get back to it much. Yeah. And there's a con there about the lawsuit, right? Yeah, especially in the States. So, and we can get back to this, like, so I can come back to that new coordination that I learned because it's mine, because I own it, because I got to it myself. This is the whole thing about somatic experiencing, right? This is so much about some of this body work where we're working with the body, but what we're working toward, and this is what I hope we're working toward in voice lessons as well, is we're working toward the self-discovery. So we're working toward finding that coordination within ourselves. So there is something about, yes, it can be faster if I just release your shoulders. Yes, it can be faster if you put your hand on my stomach and you feel that expansion, and then you can do it in your own body. Yes, it can be faster if I put my hand on your, yes, that's the other thing. That's the other thing too. Let me get to that in a second. It can be faster. It can seem faster. We get a faster result if I put my hand on your larynx and I like do something blah, 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 right? All the things that we do. I can pull the back of your neck up. Lots of different things that I can do that may be a fast way in or seem like a fast way in. When it's someone else's hands adjusting my body, I do not own it in the same way as when it is my body discovering it for myself. It's not the same kind of efficient, deep learning. It's fast learning, or it may be fast learning, but fast learning is not always the best learning. And fast learning isn't always what our body is going to be. Fast learning, we don't necessarily go back to it, right? We're not able necessarily to find it again. But when I find that stretch or whatever it was, when I find the release in my own body, that's a whole other thing than me trying to remember what it felt like for you to do it to me. See what I mean? So even in those cases where we feel like, yes, this is just fast learning and it's so efficient, I would encourage you. Yes, Liz, I think that's true too, right? Liz is saying, I'm so curious if the motivation behind faster is correlated with the feeling of needing to give students value or not waste their time. 100%, right? So that's a fundamental misunderstanding, as we've talked about before, or as I've talked about on here too. That's a fundamental misunderstanding of our jobs. Right? Our job is not to deliver stuff as quickly as possible. Our job is not to download information. That's not our job, right? Our job is to support agency and learning. So if I'm manipulating you to get you to a new coordination, that's just me downloading, you don't own it. It's not the same level of agency. So the thing that Music Junkie Studio said earlier, we can be creative enough to find other modes. We can find enough resources that offer valuable learning. Exactly. This is the other thing. Challenge yourself. If you are a hands-on teacher, challenge yourself to find the words and to find the way to lead the singers you work with toward those new coordinations, to allow them to like find those new coordinations. Modeling, asking them what's changing for them, finding new directives. These are all the things that your pedagogy has to get better at if you're not going to touch. That's the thing. We have to have better pedagogy if we're not going to touch. Yes, true story. So, our pedagogy, our teaching, our student-led learning, yeah, maybe not even words, gestures, pictures. Yeah, so many. We have to find other ways to do it, and we have to have better pedagogy. It just means our pedagogy has to be better. So, if you are a hands-on teacher, I challenge you to like figure out your pedagogy. Okay. Number 2. That was the first thing. First thing that we often get wrong is that meaningful consent is possible in the voice studio with young singers. It's not possible. Not possible. Okay. The second thing that we get wrong is that it is possible to motivate meaningful behavioral change through Challenge accepted. I love it. I love it. Oh, Christy, thank you. Yeah, Christy, yes, we have to be expert communicators, right? Our communication has to up, right? I love it. Let me know how it goes. The challenge. I love the acceptance. The second thing, yes, it is possible to motivate meaningful behavioral changes through external rewards and punishments. Look, this one is a tricky one, right? Because so much of parenting, so much of our educational system, so much of the way we work with children and young adults is based on setting up a reward system for the singer we're working with and setting up a consequences system, right? Or a punishment. Setting up a consequences system for the people we're working with. And as an adult, who understands the way that I work, who has a better understanding anyway of the way that I work best and the way that what I need in order to accomplish the things I want to do. As an adult, I can make those decisions and set up my external, I call myself an externally motivated person. I am not necessarily one of those people who is internally motivated to get up and go to the gym or get up and do the things that I want to do. I'm just not necessarily one of those people. And that's fine. It's taken me a while to accept that about myself. And so understanding that means that I can set up external reward is maybe the wrong word, but I can set up these external ways for me to be motivated. So, for example, I set up for myself, I join classes, live, workout sessions. So then I go to there, and because I've joined it and there are other people there, I know I'm going to go, right? So those are the things that I can set up for myself in order to have that internal motivation to change my behavior. What we tend to do, but that's because I'm an adult and I'm deciding for myself what's going to work for me, right? I'm an adult, I'm deciding those things. And also, often ADHD folks are not motivated by reward or punishment. Just not. Just if I get all of this work done, I get a chocolate bar. That is not a reward for me. I'll just eat the chocolate bar now because why? That's not a reward. Anyway, so but we tend to do this. Yes, this is not my learning journey. I love that. Hold a value to the progress or completed task. It's not for you. Yeah, it's not your time. Exactly, right? So what we tend to do when we're working with children, we're working with young singers, is we tend to set up things that we think are going to help to motivate their behavior. So we want them to practice. That's a live for a whole other day, right? We want them to practice. So what do we say? We say, okay, let's get a practice chart going. And every time you practice, your mom can, or your dad, or your parent can write in the, can sign it, or you can have stickers. Yeah, right? Exactly. About the ADHD. Yeah, exactly. It's not, punishments are not necessarily motivating either, right? So, anywho, so these this external system of rewards where you're gonna get you get to have a sticker, or you get to do that, and then at the end of the month, if you practiced XYZ amount of times, then you get a pencil or whatever. What we're doing is imposing externally, we're imposing a reward system and a punishment system, because if you don't practice, you don't get the pencil. Or if you don't fill in your chart, you don't get the pencil. So we're imposing a reward and punishment system to try to motivate a different behavior. So it's an external motivation process using punishment and reward. This is something we feel like is appropriate with children and young adults, right? Because we're just so frustrated that they never practice. This is not a way to it is not a way to meaningful behavioral change. It is not a way to motivate meaningful behavioral change. It's not useful. It's not effective. Why? All of the people who are already internally motivated will practice anyway. all of the people who have that internal motivation and or who have figured out their own way to have the motivation are going to, yes, this is a sign of a signing more. I was just going to say that exactly. It's going to encourage them to lie to you, right? So all of the people who have already, who've either found their own ways of motivation and or who are internally motivated people, and or who understand the way they work, how to teach the student how to practice. Yeah, that's a topic for another day. I do have a couple of live office hours around motivation and encouraging motivation in the voice studio. So I do have a couple of those. You can take a look for some of those, but which talks about that, how to like motivate to practice and those kinds of things. But yes, all of the kids, all of the folks who are internally motivated are going to do it anyway and get their rewards. That's great. All of the folks who are not internally motivated and or who do not have, some kind of system for themselves and or who, whatever, who we haven't spoken to and we haven't figured out how their motivation works. That external motivation, all it does is it makes those folks lie to you, because they still want to get their reward, or super sad and super disappointed and super mad at themselves because they couldn't do the thing and they're lazy and undisciplined and they couldn't get their reward. And also then you have to be the bad guy, because then now you have to be like, oh no, you didn't practice enough, I'm sorry, you don't get a reward. It's terrible. It's terrible. I don't want to be in that position as a teacher. And I don't want to be putting the singers I work with in the position where they have to lie to me in order to get the reward. And also, I'm really the only people who are benefiting from this are the people who would be practicing anyway, or who would be doing the thing who already have that behavior. So the only people we're rewarding the people who already have that behavior. Yeah. So this is not a useful, effective way, and it's especially not useful for kids who, for neurodivergent kids, neurodistinct kids. Yes, and you're just piling on more of an identity to sort out in therapy later. So true. So true, Christy. Yep. You're just up in that therapy bill. That's all you're doing. That future therapy bill. So this is not a useful way to go about, but there's this underlying assumption around this is a good way to work with folks to change their behavior. What we need to do when we have that instinct, when we're seeing that folks are like not doing a thing that we think they should be doing, or they're behaving in a certain way in the voice studio perhaps, that they're giving us attitude, or they're not focusing, or they never do their homework, or whatever, they never practice, I don't know, whatever. When we see that behavior, we need to ask ourselves, what am I reacting to here? Why is it so important to me that this behavior changes? Why is this specific kind of behavior so important to me? What am I reacting to? Is this behavior so important to me because someone told me it was really important and I've never actually deconstructed whether or not it is important or not? And if that is the key, if that's the case, then we start to go student-led, right? Hey, what do you want to do? Where do you want to go? What do you love about practicing? What is the thing about practicing? What is going on that in this XYZ behavior that we can find a way to change that behavior in the way that you want to change it? Do you want to change it? So there are folks out there who don't want to practice every day, and that's fine. It's church today, and that's fine. You're allowed to say to the singers you work with, hey, what does it feel like to practice every day for you? And if they say it feels like shit and it feels crappy and I never want to do it, you say, okay, let me just take that burden off of you. You don't have to practice every day. I don't care whether you practice every day. What are your goals? Is your goal to come and sing in this voice lesson for an hour a week, every week, and just have a joyful place to sing every week? Amazing. That's what we're going to do then. What about the behavior is driving you crazy and making you want to change it? Yeah? What's the should? And then is it actually Really, it should? I'm preaching to myself too. Don't worry. This isn't just like, this isn't just me dispensing the wisdom that I have completely 100% internalized. This is me every day. So, good times, good times. I have children, you know. Lene, that is a good, I'm not sure I'm saying your name correctly, but that is an excellent question. Do you find that kids actually know what they want? Right. So we are going to talk about this in the child voice class actually on Tuesdays. We are going to talk about this in terms of student-directed learning and how to move through the stages of student-directed learning from the stage where, because lots of kids don't know what they want, right? So lots of adults don't know what they want, or they've never been given a choice, or they've never been asked in a true, like, you know, in a truly meaningful way. They've never been asked what they want, right? Or they've never had the chance to sort of like dig down and figure out what they want. So yeah, this isn't just a thing for kids, but yes, we're going to talk about that actually in terms of the stages of student-led or student-directed learning, how to move through that stage from like, yes, oh yeah, often they do, yes, often they do, and sometimes it changes, and that's also cool, right? But we're going to work through those stages of like, how do we work with singers who have no idea what they want, and it isn't usually that they don't have any idea. Yes, 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 yes. Works awesome with adults. Yeah, so you can do it with kids too, right? This like working through those stages and just like going from the like, I'm just going to feed you and tell you everything that you think you like everything into I know what I want and I can go for it. Now I have the tools. Yeah, the stages. Yeah, so we're going to talk about that. The third thing that we sometimes get wrong about working with young singers is, it'll come to me, hold on. I wrote them down somewhere. Oh yes, this is the big one. It is our job to protect young voices. So again, that kind of comes through in a lot of the resources that we have. Not in full voice music, just FYI, but it does come through in a lot of the other resources that we have. It comes through real strong from some of our, you know, some folks who are out there talking about how we need to protect children from like belting, or we need to protect children from, you know, we need to protect their voices and so they should never belt, and like it comes through real strong, this like high protectionism, this like, yeah. So, but it also sounds right, right? It sounds right. Well, of course that's my job, is to protect the children and protect their voices. Like, of course that's my job. That's my job. Isn't that my job? What? To make sure they're healthy and to make sure that they're not like doing unhealthy behaviors. Like, that's my job. Is it not my job? So yes, exactly. Chrissy, you are talking my language here. So Chrissy says protect from what and why? Because there's something that is right and something that is wrong, right? So I am not talking, in this case, I'm not talking about, yeah, maybe let's not go there. I'm speaking really specifically about technical skills, singing skills, you know, using the voice, coordinations toward using the voice. I'm talking really specifically about those kinds of coordinations right now, and this idea that we need to protect singers and we need to protect children and adolescents especially, which is part of the reason that we were told that we shouldn't teach young singers. Like, part of the reason that came through for such a long time is that we shouldn't teach young singers because they're gonna, you know, they're going to hurt themselves, or they're going to set themselves up for a lifetime of like not being able to sing well, or blah blah blah, right? So we that's part of the reason, is because there was this protectionism there, and so that has changed, right? We have changed, and also that is not our job. What is our job? Our job is to support learning and agency. So our job is to offer options, and to offer options for coordinations that allow for the child, yes, the child, even the child, to make decisions about what works for them and what is sustainable for them and what gives them the most joy in their singing and gets them closer to the way that they want to sound and allows them to communicate in the way that they want to communicate. So our job is to offer options and to also, oh, I bet, oh, Liz, yeah, I think there's a lot of crossover too, right? Just in terms of agency too. Liz is saying this whole line of thinking shows up in gender affirming voice too. Yes, because I'll say too, just in terms of that crossover, this is part of the reason that folks in the neurodivergent, neurodistinct community, I'm trying to use the language here, the neurodistinct community, which lots of folks are talking about in terms of rather than neurodivergent, but anyway, neurodistinct community are why applied behavioral analysis, so ABA, can be so harmful is because there is an external idea of like what you should and should not be doing and what is healthy and unhealthy, what is good and bad. And so I'm going to tell you what you should and should not be doing, and I'm going to lead you to compliance. Oh, that's the thing that the behavior thing does too, right? Reward and punishment leads to compliance. Right? It doesn't lead to agency. It leads to compliance. It's behaviorism. So we want to like, that's, anyway, I don't have notes though. Of course I don't have notes. Why would I have notes? So I kind of missed that. All coordinations of boundaries customized to the unique instrument, and we should always provide education around context for choices to make. Exactly. So it's all about like, what is the context so that, and what are your options so that you can make the choices, and also working with singers so that they trust themselves to be able to make the choices, right? So that they know what to look for or feel for or hear for or observe in their own bodies around where the boundaries might be, so that they can make their own choices, so that they are not then constantly asking me whether this is healthy, asking me whether this is the right sound, asking me whether this is the wrong sound, right? They don't have to come to me for that information. We're moving them along this journey, this learning trajectory that gets them to the point where they are, where they can make their own choices. Agency, own choices, all of those things. So then we have, consequences and rewards and punishment. That external motivation factor, autistic folks just end up masking all day long. Like, that's just what happens. Autistic folks are just like, okay, I guess this is the way I have to do the thing. And they just end up masking all day long. It's exhausting and it's terribly, terribly challenging. So like that's what that leads to, and neurotypical folks sometimes just end up being compliant. You know, okay, I'll just be the good girl, and I'll just keep doing the right things. That is not meaningful behavioral change. That is compliance. And healthy for one is not for another. Exactly right. Yeah, I mean, if you've followed me at all, you know I have issues with healthy and unhealthy as descriptors for sound anyway, right? So, and as descriptors for coordinations as well, right? So, yeah, so that last one. The other thing about this underlying assumption that we lose so much magic to compliance, agency, everything, we lose so much to compliance, yes. The other thing about this idea or this underlying assumption that there is something to protect in the child voice and adolescent voice, you know, that we have to protect them in a certain way, that's a lot of sort of paternalistic, you know, and that's not our job. That's just not our job. We're not parents of these children. Well, I mean, I'm parents of one child, but my job is not to, even as a parent, yes, there's some protection, blah, 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 but really as a parent, it's more about like preparation and options. Again, I'm speaking here as much as I'm speaking to myself, right? It's about offering options and allowing for that growth in agency. Okay, those three things. And wouldn't you know it, all three of those things are also things that we often get wrong when we're working with mature singers or adult singers as well. Just, I know, shocking, right? But those are things that we tend to have a little bit more of a tendency to have those things in place for when we're working with child or adolescent voice, right? So there's a little bit more tendency to want to impose a reward system with children. There's a little bit more tendency to want to have this protective instinct. There's a little bit more of a tendency to, what's the first one that I said? I don't know, I can't remember. Oh, to feel like it's fine to just like manipulate their little bodies. So that is, yes, there's a little bit more of that instinct, or tends to be a little bit more of that instinct in child, in the understanding around child voice and adolescent voice, versus when we're working with adult voice, we don't tend to have that same kind of, we may not have those same assumptions. May not. We still have lots of those same assumptions to a certain extent, but right. Okay. That's the way. That's what we're going to do today, folks. That's where we go. Yeah, it's a good solid 45 minutes. So that's where we're going to go today. Terrific. If you work with child voice, if you work with adolescent voice, I would love for you to take a listen to look at the child voice and adolescent voice classes that are coming up. And as I said, I'm not discussing in those classes some of these things that we're talking about in terms of agency, in terms of those myths. We're going to talk quite a bit about like anatomy and physiology, appropriate expectations, what happens in a body that is going through a hormonal change that is more influenced by testosterone versus a body that is having hormonal changes through expanding voice that is more that does not have that same testosterone, that's more estrogen, progesterone influence. So we're going to estrogen, yes. So we're going to talk about those differences, those possible differences in terms of what's happening in the instrument, working with singers in those, going through those changes, etc. Yes, this is so true, Christy. I found that children can present with more bravery around making choices, and adults can sometimes insist on being given the rules because they're just more uncomfortable with risk. Yes, so true. And I saw Jess Baldwin was on here a little while ago. I think she would very much agree with that as well, just through her work as well, where we have adults in the voice studio who are 100% risk averse because they've just had their whole lifetime of not being given choices and or not being supported when they are making choices, right? So not being supported so that they learn from failing, or they have the ability to move through a choice not necessarily being what they expected it to be, right? So lots of folks just afraid to make those choices, uncomfortable with the risk, for sure. Yeah, for sure. And sometimes kids are way more into it. Yeah. Especially some of this, as I keep saying, especially some of this, like our current generation, sometimes this current kind of coming up generation, I think they've got a little bit more, I think they've got a little bit more sort of agency built in. Maybe. We'll see. Take care, friends. If you're interested in the voice classes, go on over to my website. See ya. Let me quit over here. 5 seconds. Boop.